From the Lean Enterprise Institute in Boston, this is the WLEI podcast, where we share stories of people making the world better through lean thinking and practice. For more information about LEI, including how we can help you apply lean thinking, please visit lean.org.
All right, so I'll kick things off in a second. This is the WLEI podcast. Mark and I are joined by Steve Spear. Welcome to the Management Brief. This month, Mark, Reich, and I will be talking with eminent individuals who've taken their career learnings and developed approaches for understanding and creating high-performing, continuously improving organizations. Today, we're joined by Dr. Stephen J. Spear, co-author with Gene Kim of the book Wiring the Winning Organization, Liberating Our Collective Greatness Through Slowification, Simplification, and Amplification. The book was published in 2023, and it will be the focus for our conversation today. So to get started, thanks, Steve, for joining Mark and I. Maybe you could take a minute, introduce yourself, kind of tell us your story, and how did you get to the point where you've got these ideas to write down in this book and publish this book to share these ideas with the world?
Yeah, Josh, thanks very much. And Mark, great to reconnect. This relates directly to Mark. In terms of self-introduction relevant to this, I'm a 30-year student of Toyota and still counting. And I started my apprenticeship when Mark was at Toyota Supplier Support Center. So he was one of my first mentors on this journey, and I consider him still to be. So this is great. In terms of, other sort of institutional identifications, I'm author of Wiring the Winning Organization, and before that, The High Velocity Edge, senior lecturer at MIT in the Sloan School of Management, and founder of a business process software firm called C2Solve, which plays upon some of the things we think is so important about organizations like those you said win by getting better faster than anybody else. So that's kind of the self-identification. In terms of how I got interested in this goes back to 30 plus years before I met Mark, which was in the 1980s, Japanese manufacturing was an existential threat to American industry. Firms there, and it turned out it wasn't all of Japan, it was just a number of them, Toyota, Honda in automotive, Mitsubishi, Sony, etc. They were able to generate and deliver value in variety, volume, with agility, resilience, reliability, etc., so far beyond what anyone else was able to do. And that was the source of the existential threat to once storied American enterprises. And so I was part of that generation, which was like, what the heck is going on here? Fortunately, that question became such an urgent one right around the time I got to MIT as a graduate student. And the Sloan School, its unofficial mission, but the one that was, for all practical purposes, the one in use, was being championed by the dean at the time, Lester Thoreau, which was beat Japan. And around that time, MIT was the pioneer in trying to figure out how to beat Japan. It set up the MIT Japan program, was the source of our first insights, some of our first insights into this, with John Krafcik's work, which got rolled up into Machine That Changed the World, and then lean thinking. So anyway, I was just wildly curious, is like, what is going on there by them that they're clobbering us here?
Maybe you could sort of bring that to life for us a little bit and share maybe a specific experience or two that contained, what they call aha moments, something that really kind of altered how you were thinking about management, performance, running businesses at the time.
Absolutely. So look, when I first got curious about this question, along with everyone else, there were all these explanations. Oh, it's something about Japanese culture versus American culture. We know that's not the case because there was some really fantastic American and other non-Japanese enterprises, which are, like you said, competing on their ability to get better, faster at everything, better than and faster than anybody else. So it wasn't a Japanese cultural thing. It certainly wasn't a Japanese governmental thing. It turns out their government is about as high functioning as ours, air quote around that. It really came down to something profoundly important about management systems. And the aha moment for me was when I was apprenticing in a very Karate Kid-like fashion at a Toyota Supplier Support Center, where Mark was at the time. And I was dropped onto a team. And I expected I was about to get this sort of indoctrination in lean tools. Here's how to do a value stream map. Here's how to do, just-in-time pull system. I was all set to put masking tape around everything on every shop floor and every desk. And that's not how I got taught by Mark and Mr. Oba, who is his mentor and sensei. I was just taught to go and see and find out things that were broken. And when I said, well, how do I do that? They said, well, no, you just go do it. And what I realized was going on is that they were teaching me to look for broken things. And the reason when they weren't telling me how is they wanted to first see what was broken in my approach. It was so there was this layer of see a problem, solve a problem. That becomes sort of a mantra in my work about how we organize our behavior, how we architect our processes, so that we can immediately see where we're wrong and use that as an immediate trigger to swarm onto the situation, figure out why it's wrong and how to make it right. Josh, you asked about insights into this. So I had my personal experience embedded on this team at a Toyota first-tier supplier in Kentucky. We did a visit to Summit Polymers. I remember when it really clicked. I'm standing on the catwalk and watching this flow of material through machines and injection molding, starting with plastic pellets on the one end and becoming air vents and that kind of thing on the other. And at first, it was so easy to get seduced by the sophistication of the machinery and of the processes. And then it was equally easy to get sucked in and look at all the production control tools. And then it hit me. I'm watching a Kanban card go from downstream, upstream, just a single step. And I realized every time it arrived, it was almost like a light went on that said, there's a need. And then when something got returned in response to the Kanban card, it was almost like the light went off, like the need's been satisfied. And I'm watching these cards go back and forth and back and forth. And I realized that Toyota was creating this circuitry to say there's a problem that has to be solved, someone has a need, and then when it was addressed, the need disappeared. And then as I watched further, I was like, all right, I see that loop, that opening and closing of a circuit, saying there's a need, there's not a need, there is a need, there's not a need. And then someone showed up with a Kanban card, and there wasn't a small box of parts to satisfy on that need. And what happened? A light went off. Literally a light went off. As the Kanban card got stuck into a stand, and that was a trigger for someone to come over and say, what's the problem? How can I help? And so, Josh, that was the moment of realization that this is a system built around the ability to see problems and respond to them quickly. And that and it's a simple thing to say, but the hard work is to keep pushing and pushing and pushing so you can see problems in greater detail with greater accuracy at smaller scale sooner before they have a chance to become big problems. And everything else I think I've done since that moment of standing on that catwalk has been elaboration on those points.
We'll talk a little bit about that. So before Mark and you dive into further conversation around the circuitry or the wiring, many of the people listening to this, certainly myself among them, would be very familiar with a lot of your work, but perhaps one of the more kind of seminal pieces of work that you've done was the article Decoding the DNA of the Toyota Production System. And so before Mark and you get into circuitry, perhaps you could talk a little bit about the DNA also and how that research that led to that article and how that article has become a part of your kind of foundational thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. So that article, Decoding the DNA of the Toyota Production System, which was in Harvard Business Review in like 1999, was a direct and immediate outgrowth of my dissertation. I co-wrote it with my doctoral advisor, Kent Bowen, the late Kent Bowen, who passed recently, sort of real loss for a lot of us. He was a mentor to many, big impact on the world. And, what we discovered in this immersion in Toyota, which was not only being part of a supplier support team, but also involved site visits to some 30 facilities in the course of writing my dissertation. And, what emerged from this is that for all the fascination around Toyota, TPS, Lean, et cetera, around tools, we realized this thing is behavioral, fundamentally behavioral. And it really roots down to this idea that the way we fuel continuous improvement with velocity, that's speed and direction and breadth and depth, is that we see where we're wrong and then build on that, swarm on where we're wrong. So the decoding article really spoke to how do we build systems. So the decoding article talks about 4 quote unquote rules in use. And the first three rules are all about the design of systems. How do you design systems? Whether it's the entire flow, the individual baton passes of handoffs over connections, or the individual activities, how do you design those so you capture your best understanding? You create a standard specification, then how can you see you're wrong? And the fourth rule in use was when you see that, what do? It's swarm on the problem and do rigorous problem solving. So that was a starting point. And as that work flowed into further discovery, I realized, well, that's a fine first step. How do you design systems, then how do you fix them? And then where the high velocity edge, the book, added to that I mean, in addition to a lot of cases and examples and that sort of thing. But where
Sure.
conceptually where it added to that is if there were a bunch of rules which were around how do we design things, systems, to see where we're wrong, and then how do we respond when we discover wrong, right? So that was the DNA article. What the high velocity edge added was, and when we've discovered something, and sometimes discovery is not a solution, it's just the existence of a problem. How do we share what we've learned so it becomes part of the systemic intellectual wealth and not just the local? And then the fourth capability we talk about there is leadership, because all this behavior around doing your work so that you're aggressively seeking where you're wrong and then calling it out so you can draw attention to where you've screwed up, and then broadcasting out to people, hey, guess what I learned by being wrong? That is so countercultural in any nation, any organization, any enterprise. So the fourth capability we put in the high velocity edge is really how leaders create the context in which people can behave in a way that is wildly countercultural in most situations.
Steve, thanks for the call out. It's great to see you again. Look forward to
Absolutely.
seeing you, I think, again pretty soon in person. So you were, I would say, a stellar student who came to TSSC and like really took the learning a lot deeper. I mean, I have to say I'm one of those people that probably lived that experience for a lot at TSSC and learning TPS for a longer time, obviously, than you did.
Yep.
But you first brought out in that Decoding the DNA article was a little bit mind-blowing for me. I found it to be really insightful because it's all that stuff below the surface that we,
Right.
because Mr. Oba just had us out there doing stuff.
Yep.
We kind of, once we reached Mr. Oba's age and learning, which probably none of us ever would, we would have like realized all those things.
Yep.
You realized them quite quickly. So I really appreciated your work over time.
Yeah, Mark, this is a quick response to Mr. Oba about that. And for those who don't know him, he was the gentleman who stood up and was president for a long period. There's a Toyota Supplier Support Center, and a longtime mentor to both Mark and me. The realization that there was something going on there was actually even before I embedded. I had a chance to visit some factories with Mr. Oba and with Professor Bowen. And the thing that was remarkable is that Mr. Oba came to an understanding about what was going on in the factory and where problems were arising in like minutes. And it was like freakish. And at first, our response was like, well, the guy's worked for Toyota for so long. I'm sure he's seen a good example of this, and this must be a bad example. But then we got into situations where it was clear he had never seen the product nor that process before, and still in the same 15-minute freakish speed, he had like complete understanding of the system and where it broke. And so I think Professor Bowen and I had an early sort of sense that there was something here other than reasoning by analogy. And look, Kent was a world-class natural scientist in the material science and whatnot. So he was already pre-wired to think in terms of first principles like Newtonian mechanics, heat transfer, Bernoulli effect, etc. So I think we already had an inclination that Mr. Oba and his peers, they weren't working off analogy or even patterns, they were working off of principles. And they just never bothered to tell anyone what they were. Anyway, Mark, back to you, but I wanted to give credit to Mr. Oba there.
Really good. I want to get to your talking about our main topic of today's conversation, which is your new, really good book. I read it. I really like it. But maybe let's just start out by saying you talked about, based on Josh's question, that you're decoding the DNA, and then you brought up high velocity edge. How did you begin to organize your understanding of organizational excellence in ways that would eventually lead to the development of that current framework through the high velocity edge leading to your book, Wiring the Winning Organization?
Yeah, so great question. Thank you, Mark. So for those of us who've been embedded in the Toyota way of thinking and doing, or I would say more, the Toyota way of doing and then thinking, credit to John Shook on that distinction, that you do first and then you learn to think properly, is that we just assumed that everyone understood that the way you're competing is on solving problems. And that the more problems you can solve, greater depth and breadth, et cetera, the better you're going to get at whatever it is you're trying to do. And if you can maintain that pace, then you're going to win, and the people who can't maintain that pace are going to lose. Part of the reason we called my first book, The High Velocity Edge, it was velocity of problem solving. Anyway, when we got onto the second book, Wiring the Winning Organization, I kind of reflected that for all the talk about problem solving, we never came out and just stated it explicitly, that The winners win because they're just much better at seeing and solving problems than anybody else. We can argue that both by process of elimination and by example, because all the examples are problem-solving energetic organizations as winners and problem-solving non-energetic organizations as losers, but also it's process of elimination, because you look at all the examples, whether it's cross-sectional, Toyota versus its competitors, or longitudinal, which you got a lot of examples there. Everything is the same, but for outcome, right? You've got people competing in the same market space looking for the similar opportunities. They're competing with similar product offerings of services and products. They're subject to the same rules and regulations. They're dependent on the same core foundational science and engineering. Everything is the same, but for outcomes. The only thing left is the management system. And so we said, you know what, the management system of the winners, and in the new book, Wiring, we just wanted to say it like on page 1. The management systems of the winners are deliberately, not accidentally, they're deliberately designed to create superb conditions in which people can solve really hard problems better, faster, more reliably than anybody else. Anyway, that becomes our assertion. And like I said, it's sort of been implied, and I realized after 30 years at this that we hadn't said it so clearly that as a leader, that is your job, to create those conditions in which the people for whom you're responsible can solve really hard problems better than they otherwise would.
Well, it sounds like what you just described was your problem you were trying to solve.
Yeah.
The clarity of that the excellence and capability of the management system is a major contributor to how the organizations that are successful. So let's talk about the core framework then a little bit that's in the book. If you could briefly describe, maybe a little more depth, the wiring approach that's in the book and its key components, particularly around those mechanisms of slowification, simplification, and amplification.
Yeah, absolutely. So early in the book, I think it's certainly in part 1, chapter 1 or 2, we say 2 important frameworks that get started. One is it gets back to this thing about competing on our ability to see and solve problems. And we say, look, we take for granted that human ingenuity is applied to the objects, quote unquote, literally, figuratively, the objects on the benchtop in front of us. Like whether it's a gear and you have to have great understanding of material science and just the mechanics of how gears mesh, or it's a piece of genetic code and you have to have great understanding of that, or it's someone in the medical practices looking at a tumor. There's a huge amount of ingenuity required to understand, manipulate, change the object on the benchtop in front of us. So that's layer 1. And then we say there's another layer at which we need tremendous ingenuity, and that's layer 2, which is the instrumentation through which we work on the objects in front of us. So we go back to that gear, whether it's instrumentation for machining or additive manufacturing or whatever else it is, there's a huge amount of ingenuity there. I joke in the MIT context, the stuff on the benchtop in front of us is kind of the domain of the School of Science, and the instrumentation is the domain of the School of Engineering. But then there's room for the Sloan School of Management in this, and that's the third layer. And what we call is this term social circuitry is all the processes, the procedures, the routines by which the work of individuals is integrated into collective action towards common purpose. And we were very deliberate on picking the term circuitry because when we start thinking out about, Mark does some work and hands it to Steve, and then Steve does some work and hands it to Josh, then it goes to Rachel and on and on. And we start seeing as a network of relationships. And here's the thing where the stellar organizations, part of the source of triumph, they worry obsessively about the structure and dynamic of that network of relationships. So those relationships work in such a way that it's much easier to solve hard problems than not. And what you see in organizations which really struggle is that as much as they are really committed to the problems on the benchtop in front of them, layer 1, and committed to understanding the instrumentation through which individuals work, layer 2, they're kind of like in their blind spot is concerned about the social circuitry on layer 3. So anyway, that becomes a really important framework in the book, is that the winners win because it's the layer 3 architecting of a great network of relationships which allow this great problem-solving conditions to exist.
Okay. I think it would probably help our audience. Give us an example. You have multiple case studies in your book. Maybe you can briefly describe how one organization using the layer 3 you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll use, in the book, we talk about these different mechanisms to improve the odds that we can solve really hard problems. And one is we call amplification. In the lean of the Toyota domain, the andon chord is the epitome of amplification. As soon as you have a problem, you can see it. Jidoka is an amplification. So anyway, not going to spend a lot of time on that. And then there's another technique we talk about, and we can come back to it later, called slowification, which is allowing ourselves the time, the space to engage the creative, generative, self-critical, self-reflective parts of our brain, so to make problem solving easier to do. But then we get on to this other one we call simplification. And simplification is to make problems easier to solve. And to your question about getting better wiring. So the failure mode, and again, think about what we do. The reason we form enterprises in the first place is we have a really hard problem that we can't solve individually. It may be such a big problem we just simply don't have the time, or it may be such a hard problem that we don't have individually the capability, so we have to get that cross-functionality. One or the other, or more often both. So what's the failure mode? Is that we organize people by function. Mark is expert in one thing, Josh in another, Rachel in another, John in another, Jim in another, Steve in another, and go off and do your thing. And somehow we hope that the pieces will come together into a well-integrated whole at some point. And we know that sort of siloification, isolation in silos, it doesn't work. It's never worked. It's never worked in the private sector. It doesn't work in the public sector. For those of us who interact with the healthcare system and you bounce around doing the integration as a patient or a family member, we know it doesn't work there. And why is that? Because with really hard problems to solve, it's the synergy, it's the synthesis across all these expertise, which is the source of the magic. So anyway, that's the failure mode. So what's the success look like? So in Wiring the Winning Organization, we have an example of a team doing a critical phase of drug development. And you've got the chemists over here, conceiving of really cool molecular structures. And then they get their chance, saying a little bit for entertainment, mix things together with test tubes and beakers and heat them up. And then there's a whole separate laboratory which runs the tests on those, and someone else worried about materials and purification and all of that. And they have, and for good reason, they all have their domains of expertise, but the pieces weren't coming together well. And the transformation was the head of the chemistry lab, a woman named Beth, and the head of the biology lab where the tests were constructed and run, a guy named Jeff. Coincidence that the names rhyme, but Beth and Jeff. And they realized that they were really suffering, not in the local productivity of generating new ideas of their labs. It was their ability to communicate and collaborate was horrible. And so they started going in Mark, in a one-by-one fashion, Beth saying, this is the next thing we're working on. And Jeff said, oh, what are you trying to learn from that? And then Beth explains, Jeff says, well, we can construct a test that will help you learn. And then when Beth did her work with her colleagues and handed it over to Jeff not just throwing a report back to her, but saying, here's the report. Now let me explain to you what it means in terms of what we learned about the molecule that you conceived and synthesized. So anyway, that example, and there's more detail obviously in the book, but is a creation of this peer-to-peer set of connections at the operating level, rather than having ideas having to go way up a silo and try to integrate at the top.
That's a really good example. Thanks. Maybe you can help our audience understand what you mean in the book by danger zones versus winning zones.
Yeah.
How does an organization or wiring kind of move problem solving from one to the other?
Yeah, fantastic. So early on in the book, Gene and I assert that the winners win by their capability to solve really hard problems better, faster, more reliably, et cetera, than anybody else. So once we've said that, then we say, well, let's have the self-reflection here. What makes that really hard to solve hard problems? And I remember, first working on this idea, and as a plug to a really great organization, it was at a Greater Boston Manufacturing Partnership conference right after COVID, where I started having this conversation with the audience. I said, well, let's think about this. What makes it hard to solve problems? And it's like, well, if you hand someone a problem with all its complexity and everything tightly intertwined and integrated all at once, that's a hard problem to solve. Make it not safe to try and solve the problem. Either I'll call you stupid, so there's a psychological safety issue there, or if you start to tinker with the thing, there's a physical safety thing. Allow no time. Say, hey, Mark, I need an answer right away. That doesn't really help. Don't allow iteration, because we know everything we There's a cliche out in Silicon Valley, oh, you got to fail fast. I did the summation on that. If you fail fast and get a lot of failure, you have a lot of failure. That's not the point. It's to experiment quickly, right? Experimentation needs a lot of iteration. There's a cliche, right, about Thomas Edison when someone says, how'd you figure out how to make a light bulb work? He said, well, I figured out how to make it not work 10,000 times. So that's all was left, right? And the Wright brothers also, we talk about the Wright brothers in the Wiring book about just being incredibly energetic, high-speed experimenters. But anyway, so if you want to talk about a danger zone, eliminate the opportunity to experiment. And so we say, in contrast, what must be the characteristics in which the conditions are really good to solve really hard problems? And that's what we call the winning zone, which is everything is the same but opposite, right? Which is the problems have been broken up and on and on. So we say, well, how do you, as a leader, how do you change the conditions in which the people for whom you're responsible, how do you change the conditions in which you're asking them to solve hard problems? And you say, well, we got to get from the danger zone down to the winning zone. So how do we do that? And so the book offers 3 mechanisms. And the first is slowification. That if we're going to ask people to solve problems, we can't ask them to solve problems while they're trying to maintain operational tempo. Because operational tempo is like all the habits, routines that stimuli response, muscle memory. But that's not where our brain works well. We say, no, you got to give the committed time and space for people to, kind of kick back and think a little bit and say, I wonder how that works. Let me try. So slowification is the set of behaviors that allow us that allow problem solving to be easier. And then the second one is, well, what can we do to make the problems themselves easier to solve? So as one example, we talked about creating linear flow at the operating level rather than stuff going up and down through silos. That's an example of simplification. In the tech world now, they talk a lot about different forms of modularizing things, APIs, containers, Kubernetes, etc. All of that is to take this wholly big problem and break it into small pieces, make the problem easier to solve. There are other examples of that. And then we say as a fundamental behavior, if we're going to compete by being in the winning zone as much as possible, we have to amplify problems, see them earlier and more often when they're still small before they have had a chance to become big. Back to the andon chord or Jidoka. So anyway, those are 3 mechanisms to get from danger to winning zone. Amplify problems so we're on them quickly. Then slow down, slowify, so we can, the problem solving itself is easier to do. And then as we're trying to generate solutions, go in the direction of simplification. So problems are easier to solve and systems are easier to manage.
So I'm going to make a comment that probably our listeners who are lean geeks are going to geek out on it. Some may not, but when the whole slowification thing, what you brought to mind to me, Steve, and this would probably resonate with you, is we often refer to, like, when we're trying to understand our problem, it's grasping the current state. And I think it made me think about that a little more deeply. Because
great.
I have those of us that lived and worked in Toyota have a fairly specific, deep meaning to what that is. I think it's often not commonly understood what that means, but it means like researching and understanding your own. Like, you have to slow down and understand what the current, that may take a while to understand the current state, and you may not understand it as effectively as you need. So you may need to go through cycles of that. So that was a great reminder of that.
Mark, that's fantastic. I'll just make a quick reference to what's, I think, a really brilliant point there. Brilliant point means it's a really good point, and damn, I wish I'd put it in the book, right? So you go back to the guy who was the primary architect on the Toyota production system, Taiichi Ohno, and the mythology around him is having him draw a chalk circle on the floor, a shop floor, and having someone stand there and watch something till they could grasp the current condition. What is that? It's have the patience to study something till you really think you can understand it. In the High Velocity Edge, in the chapter about leadership, we lead with a case study about a guy named Bob Dallas, who's making this transition into the Toyota system. And his mentor, one of your colleagues, has Bob sit there. And this is a guy of enormous accomplishment. And he just has him sit there and say, before you do anything, study. So anyway, I think you're right, Mark. Whether it's Ohno's circle on the shop floor or whatever else, those of us who were immersed in this Toyota doing and thinking understand that when we have a problem, the first thing we have to do is give our brains the chance to understand it before we act.
Okay. All right, a couple more questions I have, because this is very interesting. I really like this question. Your book emphasizes, because I think there's a lot of applicability to our audience, it emphasizes liberating people's ingenuity rather than maximizing efficiency. How does this shift in focus change how leaders should think about organizational design?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Look, there's too much in society where leaders think their job is to somehow collect data, do analysis, and then tell other people what to do. I'm actually a fan of what AI can do to us to sort of augment our natural intelligence. I fear that the leaders who are predisposed to thinking that their job is data collection, analytics, and then command and control, AI will become an unholy devil for the rest of us. So anyway, thinking about these two contrasts, and in the book, in Wiring, we have an appendix called Transactional versus Developmental Leadership. So the transactional leader has this mindset, right? And then they almost dismiss the people for whom they're responsible and dismiss their creativity, dismiss their ingenuity, dismiss their commitment to mission. They start treating them as something sort of like an inanimate object. And so then when they start thinking about how to gain efficiency out of their organization, they come up with all this sophisticated math, managing the flow of materials through machines. And again, literally or metaphorically. And then people are there merely as attendants to the material and the machinery. I don't know about you, but I find that like so ethically revolting to have dozens, hundreds, thousands of people come into a facility to be servants to. It's like, I don't know. It's like the Bible talks about, against like worshiping idols. And that's what it is. It's like idol worship. Mark, Josh, come to work and worship the masses of iron, aluminum, and silicon. It's like, what the hell? I thought that was gone 4,000 years ago. So anyway, what we're trying to say is that, look, I'll just quote Paul O'Neill on this. We talk about him in both books, The High Velocity Edge and Wiring the Winning Organization, for the reason that during his period of leadership at Alcoa not only became the safest employer in the country, they did so while also achieving extraordinary improvement in quality, yield, timeliness, throughput, et cetera, et cetera. They were generating so much useful knowledge in terms of how to turn inanimate materials into useful things that their stock price started to track like the .coms without the bust, as opposed to just the holder of a raw material. Anyway, Paul, when asked how he orchestrated such a phenomenal turnaround, his response was something like, look, when my competitors had employees come into work every day, they said, oh, there's the locker, put your lunchbox in, hang up your coat, check your brain for the day. And then just tend to the materials and the machines in this sort of idolatry-like fashion. And he said, what I did is I said, as the bodies came in the door, he said, hey, thanks for bringing all those extra brains to work. We could put them to good use. And Paul said, look, if corporate headquarters has, let's say, 100 people, and we got 100 people, and they have a workforce of 10,000, we got a workforce of 10,000. If on the one hand, they're telling their 10,000 to check their brains, their team every day is 10. He says, and if every day I'm thanking the bodies to bring in all this human creativity into work every day, my team is 10,010. He says, which team is going to win? So that was Paul's line.
That's great.
Yeah.
So you're quick question. I think you clarify this through a lot of the case studies in the book, but is your approach applicable to any organization, and does it need to be modified depending on what industry you're in?
Mark, I appreciate the question. So as I said earlier in our conversation that we want to get out of this danger zone into the winning zone so we can solve really hard problems better, faster than anybody else. And we talked about, well, where do problems exist? On the benchtop in front of us, layer one, on the instrumentation through which we act on that benchtop, layer two, and then there's social circuitry. So here's the thing, that social circuitry, that network of relationships is all people trying to work towards achieving the same mission through collective action. And now the things they might work through layer two and the things they might work on layer one, that might change. But we're talking about how people are able to act together. And it doesn't matter what's on the benchtop or what the instrumentation is, because we're really focusing on human intellect, human character, human motivation, ethics, and that kind of thing. And so I know that sounds hypothetical or conceptual, but it plays out, right? Because we know this works in Toyota. Okay, fine. It works in probably one of the most engineering intensive, sophisticated industries in the world for the last 40, 50 years. That's a pretty good run to say they might be good. All right, I'm just saying, right?
Yes.
And we know it transferred over to Alcoa beautifully. All right. So you say, oh, well, that's still engineering intensive industry. Well, it's worked wildly good in healthcare, where if you have medical practices which really take on the social circuitry concern of getting out of the danger zone into the winning zone, elimination of complications, doubling of capacity, reducing overburden on staff. I made mention of an example in drug development. It worked there. There's another case in both books about Pratt and Whitney. So it worked in the design of very sophisticated products like jet engines. On my resume, I put a big accomplishment is when we're doing this work in Pittsburgh with the Pittsburgh Regional Healthcare Initiative around improving the quality of care patients received while also improving the experience of care providers. Some of these ideas spilled over to the Pittsburgh Women's Center and Shelter. And they ran in a hotline for victims to call, and it worked there too. When they got started on applying these ideas of making problems much easier to see and then swarming on them one by one, if someone finally got the courage to call and say, I need help, they'd find out it would take 4 days to navigate all the agencies. I know that's a jaw-dropping response. 4 days to navigate all the agencies and all the departments to, around getting kids relocated, medical care, legal representation, boom, boom, boom. Because there were 42 different entities and took 4 days. So anyway, the folks, and these are all volunteers, working on something very critical on this hotline. When I said, well, why does it take us 4 days? They said, because that's what we know how to do. We know how to do 4 days. They said, why don't we know how to... And why can't we do it faster? Is that we don't know how, right? And that's the key switch. It's not blaming the 42 agencies. It's saying the problem is our ignorance. We got to figure this out. And they did, and they got it down, Mark, believe this or not, Josh, 4 hours. 4 days to 4 hours. So what 4 days sounds like is someone calls up and, hey, I finally realized I got to get out of the situation. Then what's going to take you 4 days? Click. I don't have 4 days to be that brave. On the other hand, I finally realized I got to get out of the situation. What's involved? Give us your address. A taxi's on the way. 4 hours from now, you and your children will be in a much better situation. Boom. Those people are out on the sidewalk waiting for that taxi to show up. I mean, this works everywhere.
That's a great story.
One way to think. This works everywhere.
That's amazing. I guess it was maybe a year ago, Steve, our mutual friend, Vicky Peisowitz, arranged for me to spend a day with her in Pittsburgh. And she introduced me to someone that I'm sure you know very well, Keith Turnbull.
Yep.
At the church where he served,
yes.
was serving at the time as an elder, I think, or a deacon. I also had a chance to meet his son, who had led a project to build a community center in their church. I'm forgetting the name of the church, Allegheny something, I want to say. But anyway, it seems to me, sort of listening to you talk about that's just been sort of a continuation of that work, because that community center located right there in the heart of a really challenged part of the city. It was one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen, actually. They literally laid out the blueprints and then constructed the building to reflect what they had defined as 7 value streams, I think was the language that they were using.
Awesome.
That people in need in that community might pass through from their need to support, and these would be an individual battling like a drug addiction, for example. And they had thought so meticulously about the steps in that individual's value stream to get to the help that they need, and then built a physical building that would reflect flow through that value stream. It was just, anyway, one of the more remarkable things that I've ever seen, and so inspiring to get to learn a little bit from Keith directly, who was a senior executive reporting directly to Paul O'Neill during that remarkable turnaround, then to meet his son, who he had passed on many of the lessons to, but get to learn about just sort of the hotbed of this kind of work that Pittsburgh has been for many, many decades, which to me personally was new learning for me.
Yep. Hey, Josh, if I can pick up on that really awesome example, Keith Turnbull, who was the champion within Alcoa on behalf of Paul O'Neill for this, the number of lives he impacted in that role, the tens of thousands of lives he impacted for the better is just extraordinary. And you start thinking about what Keith is doing now with this church, is that he's using these very simple principles to not only design the processes, the experiences, and the physical place in which they'll occur, but because the principles are so simple, he can convey them to people who may have never done this work before in such a way that they can give this much fuller expression of their ability to do something creative on behalf of other people. And then to your point about Keith conveying this to his son, and this is the brilliance of what Toyota invented. And I had the good fortune of learning from folks like Mark and Mr. Oba and Kent Bowen, Keith Turnbull, along with Vicky and some others, is like the principles are very simple, which is, in some regards, that's the beauty, right? Because it was very complicated principles. How do you convey them to people you don't know? How do you convey them generation to generation to generation? But so what's the hard part? It's simple ideas. It's just very hard work. because you got to be on top of this all the time with the time commitment, the emotional commitment to constantly design things and then immediately say what's wrong with it.
Yeah.
And then respond positively like, thank you for telling me. But, simple and hard is much better than hard and simple. Because hard and simple, how do you convey that? You can't.
Sure. Well, it was the coolest. Sorry to continue going on about this, but it was the first time that I had seen a physical environment so thoughtfully reflect the work and the value stream in a not like non-production, non-manufacturing environment. Right. Personally, I just never seen anything that remarkable. And it wasn't just the reflection of the flow that these individuals would pass through, but it was also in reflection of the systems for amplification, for example. So they had been very thoughtful around what problems might occur along that value stream and what would be the mechanisms available to those that witness that problem to be able to call for help,
right,
for example, and then like where that call for help would go and to whom, and the answer to that question, sort of to whom would receive that signal, like where should they be physically located
Bingo.
in order to respond to the problem in whatever time would be required for such a response. I mean, just in every way, both at that sort of like, sort of the horizontal flow level, the building reflected what was going to happen inside that value stream, but then also the sort of vertical escalation that would happen into sort of the realm of quote unquote management was also very thoughtfully designed into their building. Anyway.
It's fantastic. And Josh, this is a beautiful example. And you think about how deliberately respectful such an approach is for everybody concerned, deliberately respectful.
Yeah, it was amazing. Okay, so back to some of our conversation around the book and the collaboration that you had with Gene Kim, your co-author for Wiring, given his background, and you would know his background better than I would, but Gene very much comes out of the tech world, was creating this opportunity for the two of you to come together and draw from examples that you were much more familiar with, let's say more in the kind of the hardware space, that Gene was very familiar with, let's say in the software space. And you've spoken to some of that a little bit, like the concept of modularization and its utility in software development and the tech industry generally. So I'm curious, what maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the patterns that you picked up on in your conversation with Gene around just the design of the management systems in these winning organizations, maybe specifically around the way that those management systems build people's capabilities to work in this way, to solve problems in this way, to grow, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Like you said, Gene Kim comes out of this, IT tech world, coding and that kind of thing. What was happening there, and Gene has really built a reputation, a very good and well-earned reputation as a thought leader on topics like agile, DevOps, and some of these other buzzwords your listeners may be familiar with. And you start looking at what that stuff is that it was response to very difficult, unproductive, often unsuccessful approaches to managing the design, the installation, the operation, and the improvement of very complex, increasingly complex IT systems, 60s into 70s into 80s. And in some regards, the IT world was wrestling with this issue of unmanageable complexity on, let's say, a 10 to 15 to 20-year lag of the physical industrial world. I mean, that's just because, it took a while for Moore's Law to put enough microprocessors out in the world and enough people to sit there and type lines of code that it became an issue for them too. And what they were discovering is that the failure modes they had were exactly the ones that, we were discovering in the industrial community, right? Which is people working in isolated functions and hoping for integration on the end. Didn't work. The DevOps community or the DevOps approaches of getting cross-functional collaboration very early on, all the way through the life of a system, was a direct response to that. The idea of conceiving, setting requirements on something, and designing it, installing it, and then only getting feedback at the end. They realized that getting feedback on the whole thing at the very end, so you're getting lots of feedback very late, was definitely danger zone kind of conditions. So the response is agile was a response to that. And for those of you less familiar, basically agile says is like, come up with an idea, hand it to Mark, have Mark tell you what's wrong with the idea till you get and go through that until you figure you got some stability on the idea. and then add a little bit of novelty to it, and then hand it to Mark again so he can tell you how it sucks, and then do that, right? And so the Agile folks basically were a response to enormous amounts of feedback about the entire thing very late, and instead getting lots of little feedback fast and frequent. So anyway, they were doing for IT systems what Toyota realized going back to the 50s and 60s, what you needed to do for physical systems. And so what Gene and I, through a lot of conversation, realized we were saying the same thing, just using different words about different locations. And it would probably be a service to both our communities to try to harmonize on the words. And so we make it clear that we're harmonizing on the ideas. And in some regards, we're trying to solve a common problem. We've all had the experience where someone says, oh, this must be a lean problem versus a Six Sigma problem versus a DevOps problem versus an Agile problem.
Exactly.
Like, all right, folks, it's a people problem. That's it. Is people are in a relationship and either relationships aren't working because they can't see problems, they can't solve problems, or they can't systematize what they learned. And so we thought we were doing some kind of service here to simplify the language so people could speak and collaborate across domains.
I think it's wonderful. I think it's a service indeed. Okay, so maybe on the topic of like applicability. So somebody's going to read the book or engage with some of your other work and want to do something with what they've encountered. They're inspired to do something. So maybe you could speak a little bit to how you help leaders in particular sort of translate these ideas into application, what resonates with those leaders, that kind of.
Yeah, so thank you. I've had really good fortune, blessing over now 30 years at this to engage with with leaders who are really passionate about their obligations to the people for whom they're responsible. Paul O'Neill, as an example, Mr. Oba and his very senior wise colleagues at Toyota, some of the leaders you mentioned, the Pittsburgh community and the leaders in that healthcare community. Here in Boston, Paul Levy, who was at Beth Israel Deaconess, real commitment, real passionate driving commitment. And so what has been consistent across those folks is, again, their sense of their responsibility as a leader is first to the people who do the creative work of the organization and creating and improving the conditions in which they're trying to do things useful for others. And if they get that right, then all this sort of transactional leadership mindset of, oh, I'm really beholden to stakeholders and stockholders and this thing and the market, this and that. It's like that stuff will flow if we create really great conditions for people to create value. On the other hand, if we really screw up those conditions, we're not going to be at all successful on these second, third, fourth, and fifth order metrics of success. So that's one thing. I'm working with a guy now, a group of senior leaders at the Navy's Portsmouth shipyard in Kittery, Maine, where they do major what they call depot level maintenance, major overhaul on nuclear powered attack submarines. And the leaders there talk about, what they're doing. And they start thinking about the contrast of words. This is a government-owned shipyard run on behalf of the Navy, a military organization, where the technical complexity of the system they're working on is off the charts, right? It's a submarine that can be subjected to the crushing pressures of the depths while having nuclear power on board. And how they talk about it is like, oh, no, we got to lead with empathy. We got to lead with empathy. We got to make sure we're leading at the point of work. And if there's a problem, we got to make sure we're having a conversation about the problem at the point of work in the problem space with the problem holder. It's like, and how about all this nuclear stuff? Yeah. I mean, that's important. If we don't get the lead with empathy at the point of work with the problem holder, the nuclear stuff will be a problem. On the other hand, if we do it the right way, we got a good handle on all the stuff about reconstructing reactors and refueling and all the other crazy stuff that a bunch of real hardworking, mission-oriented patriots do up in Kittery every day on our behalf.
Right. How would you recommend a curious leader get started?
Yeah, so we talk in wiring and make reference to a similar idea in the High Velocity Edge about creating a quote-unquote model line. And that's probably pretty familiar to Mark. And there's two ways a model line can be interpreted, so I'll go with wrong first. You get a lot of people think model line, that's got to be the show pony. The one that we make looking, perfect. It's like Epcot, the factory of the future. And we'll just invest a lot of time and energy in getting it really pretty and clean. And I was in a factory where they literally had extra good lighting on this one production cell because it was their model line. And you had to, it was difficult to access it because heaven forbid you got it dirty, right? There's nothing about what I described which is actually consistent with model line. Model line really it's a small footprint, a platform on which people can safely practice a different way of doing, so it becomes a part of their thinking. And I'll give an example because we've written it up in the shipyard newsletter. So the model line at this Portsmouth yard started with a single machinist named Emery. And she was an apprentice. She wasn't even an experienced machinist. She just graduated her apprenticeship program a couple of months ago. And a single valve. And a submarine's got lots and lots of valves. And if you got 3, 4, 5 projects in a shipyard at a time, you're talking thousands of valves. It started with one. And the way this model line worked is that when Emery was given a new job, and the valve had a particular name, when she was given this job, Emery's job was to refuse to start work until until the job itself was ready to work, start to finish, uninterrupted. And why was that? Emery was flipping the lens, because normally with a lot of second-rate improvement efforts, the system is putting their light on the node, the person at the point of work, and saying, hey, Mark, hey, Josh, hey, Steve, let me tell you how you're failing. And this model line was for the person at the point of work, Emery, an apprentice, to turn the lens around on the system and say, let me tell you how you're failing me. And it became an opportunity for folks who ran all the supporting functions of materials and contracting and lifting and engineering to figure out how they were not wired well to the point of work where Emery had to do her thing and how to repair that. Now, it was one ball valve, right? But what ended up happening, people were like, that's how I'm failing Emery. And if I'm failing Emery in that fashion, the hundreds and hundreds of other machinists and mechanics I'm failing at their point of work if I continue to do the same thing. And so what happened with this model line approach, again, a tiny little footprint, but it expanded across all these legs, all the way up to the senior leadership at the shipyard, across senior leadership, across all these departments. And they were like, well, we can do a much better job, and it turns out to be a lot easier to support Emery in a better wired fashion. So let's do that on the next job in the valve area and in adjacent areas in the machine shop and to other shops as well. So anyway, how to get started, find a point of work, just one, and get engaged, lead with empathy at that point of work and figure out a problem, one by one, figure out a problem that you can solve to make it easier at the point of work, and then move on to the next problem. So,
Nice.
Again, keep it simple, but make it hard.
As a quick aside, you talked about the two understandings around a model line, one of which is wrong,
Completely.
one of which is right. It is a term that we use to describe that model line that I think does perhaps lend itself towards some of those misunderstandings. But in any case.
Yeah, so Josh, if people stumble on the semantics, another term is called a training platform, which is you're going to a place where to acquire a skill you don't have. And whether, whatever it is, I think training platform is also pretty good.
Yeah. Learning lab, I've heard, different things. Okay. My final question, then I'll hand it back over to Mark to kind of wrap things up. So what are some of the common pitfalls that you see, Steve, with organizations that are attempting to put these ideas into action and they struggle to do so?
Look, fundamentally, we're talking about behaving in a different way. So you learn to think in a different way. And then when you think in a different way, you just consistently doing differently. And so it's just back to the 3 mechanisms in wiring. And in fact, John Richardson, who is chief of naval operations for a 4-year period, he wrote the foreword, and he gives, I think, a very eloquent sort of endorsement of these mechanisms to get out of the danger zone into the winning zone. But then he has a piece in there. He says, well, if you really want to blow this, what do you do? And he says, the first thing is stop amplifying. Don't listen to the person at the point of work or the user of your product or the person experiencing the services you provide. Stop listening. Don't amplify. He says, because once you stop amplifying, then you have no reason to slowify. And if you don't slowify, you're never going to simplify. And what you end up doing then is just keep repeating the same experiences you're hardwired to have. So how do how do you fail? Don't lead with empathy. Stop listening. And once you stop listening, then the whole thing falls apart.
I think we saved the toughest question for last, maybe. You've done decades of research and practical application on TPS and then your 2 books. Looking across all that, what gives you the most optimism about organizations' ability to transform?
Yeah. So, Mark, it is a great question. And the optimism, it goes back to something Kent Bowen said to me. Josh's example about Keith Turnbull taking this from in Alcoa in the corporate setting out into the community is that most people go through their non-professional days trying to do things that other people will appreciate. And we know that, right? Because we have Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, we have Little League, we have PTAs, we have choirs at churches. People go out of their way to give expression to their innate ability to be creative throughout their lives. That's why people invest so much in, hosting family meals, right? They want to put effort in the kitchen so that when people come over and on the dining room table, they have a great experience. And so this approach, and I'm not saying anything original to me, I'm really channeling Oba, Bowen, Turnbull, and others, is that all we're asking people to do is take exactly the same attitude into the workplace that they have in their personal lives. And if we do that,
Wow.
then actually, Mark, I'm thinking out loud, you know that TV show Severance, right? Where there's a persona that's outside of work and a persona inside of work. And it's kind of a horror. Those who haven't seen it, recommend it highly, worth the subscription. But right now, too often in organizations, we ask people to have this severance experience where outside in their personal life, they're striving so hard to be valued by others. And this is not in sort of any kind of narcissistic, weak way. It's just, this is what people try to do. It gets back to like our creative origins, is that we want to do things useful and valuable to others. And then we bring them into the workplace and we tell, oh, no, none of that. We're going to be demeaning of you, of your potential, your opportunity, your chance for appreciation. So all we're saying is, what we've naturally been created or evolved to do, just extend that into the workplace. And Mark, that's my source of optimism, because when you start having conversations with people that way and get them to talk about all the joy they have as coach of this, as head of that, as volunteer here, it's like, look, just don't leave that at the door. Just bring it in. And people, when you say, oh, that's what you want me to do? Yeah, they're happy to do that.
Steve, I couldn't think of a better way to wrap up this interview. Thank you very much for spending the time with Josh and I, and look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and
for
guys,
sure.
thanks for creating this platform and giving me a chance to share some thoughts on it. Because those of us who were exposed to Toyota and others like Toyota realize that it is such a profoundly different, better, morally, ethically superior way to engage people every day. And not only because it's better for them, but because it's better for them and that's how we behave, it becomes better for us. It's fantastic to amplify that message out to the larger world.
It's been our privilege, Steve. Thank you for taking the time and joining us. And we look forward to ongoing collaboration. We've got a few things in the works that we'll be doing together over the next several months, year even. So we look forward to continuing the work and the conversation. Thanks,
Absolutely.
Steve.